In the winter of 1817, a young noblewoman vanished from the most guarded mansion in London. She was hours away from a forced marriage that would have ended her life as she knew it. Desperate and hunted, she did the only thing she could. She threw herself into the back of a passing carriage, praying for salvation. She thought she had found a hiding place. She was wrong. She had just locked herself in a steel cage with the one man in England more dangerous than the monster she was fleeing. This is the true untold story of how a runaway bride accidentally kidnapped the most powerful duke in the empire, and the scandal that almost burned London to the ground. The fog that night in London was not merely weather. It was an accomplice. It rolled off the Thames thick and yellow, choking the gas lamps of Grosvenor Square until the grand townhouses looked like tombstones rising from a graveyard. Inside the Stirling estate, the air was hot, perfumed, and suffocating. Lady Genevieve Stirling stood before the floor-to-length mirror in her bedchamber, the silk of her wedding gown, a garment that cost more than a tenant. Farmer earned in a decade, felt like a shroud. Her hands trembled as she touched the lace at her throat. It was too tight. Everything in her life had become too tight. "You look adequate," a voice grated from the doorway. Genevieve didn't turn. She watched in the reflection as her father, the Viscount Stirling, stepped into the room. He was a man who wore his dissipation in the broken veins of his nose and the tremor of his hands. "Baron Vane is downstairs," the Viscount said, taking a swig from a crystal flask. "He wishes to inspect the merchandise before the ceremony tomorrow." Genevieve felt bile rise in her throat. "I am your daughter, father. Not a broodmare to be sold to clear your gambling debts. You are whatever I say you are." The Viscount slammed the flask onto the vanity, cracking the glass. "Vane pays the debts. You marry Vane. If you weep at the altar, I will make you regret it. Now fix your face. You go down in 10 minutes. He slammed the door, the lock clicking a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Genevieve stared at the door. Baron Silas Vane. The name alone made the skin crawl on her arms. He was 40 years her senior, a man rumoured to have buried 3 wives in suspicious accidents at his estate in Cornwall. He had eyes like a dead fish and hands that left bruises, even when he was being gentle. I will not survive a week with him, she thought the realization cold and absolute. I will be the 4th wife in the crypt. She looked at the window. 3 stories up. Impossible. She looked at the fireplace. A service flue, too narrow. Then her eyes landed on the laundry chute in the corner, hidden behind a silk screen. It was madness. It was unladylike. It was dangerous. It was perfect. Genevieve didn't hesitate. She grabbed a dark velvet cloak to cover the shimmering white of her gown, snatched a letter opener from the desk for protection, and shoved the heavy oak screen aside. The chute smelled of lye soap and mildew. "Better a broken leg than a broken spirit," she whispered. She gathered her skirts and slid into the darkness. The fall was terrifying, a chaotic tumble of silk and limbs that ended abruptly in a pile of linens in the scullery. She gasped, winded pain shooting through her ankle. The kitchen was bustling, but the noise of the pots and the shouting of the cook covered her arrival. She crawled behind a stack of flour sacks, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The back door. It was just 10 paces away. She waited for the scullery maid to turn toward the stove, then bolted. The night air hit her like a physical blow, wet, freezing, and tasting of coal smoke. She was out. But she wasn't free. "Hey, you there!" a groom shouted from the stables. Genevieve didn't look back. She hiked up the heavy wedding dress and ran. She ran through the muddy cobblestones of the mews, her satin slippers soaking through instantly. She could hear shouting behind her now. The alarm had been raised. Vane's men would be fast. They were ruthless street thugs hired to protect the Baron's interests. She turned a corner onto South Audley Street, panic rising. A carriage was rumbling down the street, moving fast. It was a massive black behemoth of a vehicle drawn by 4 black Frisians that looked like beasts of war. There were no crests on the door, no livery she recognized, just an imposing fortress-like structure of dark wood and iron. It slowed as it navigated a deep puddle. This was it. Fate or folly. Genevieve lunged from the shadows. She grabbed the rear handle of the carriage. The leather was slippery with rain. She swung her legs up, finding purchase on the rear step, and tried the door. Locked. No, 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 she sobbed under her breath. The carriage began to pick up speed. The horses' hooves clattered louder. Behind her, she heard the heavy boots of Vane's men turning the corner. She shimmied along the side of the moving carriage, the wheels spinning inches from her dragging hem. She reached the window. It was unlatched. With a strength born of sheer terror, she pushed the sash up, grabbed the frame, and hauled herself through the opening headfirst. She tumbled onto the floor of the carriage in a wet, shivering heap of white silk and velvet, gasping for air, clutching the letter opener. Safe. She was safe. The interior was warm, smelling of cedar, expensive tobacco, and old leather. The noise of the rain was muffled here. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her breathing. Clack! The sound was unmistakable. It was the hammer of a flintlock pistol being pulled back. A deep voice, smooth as velvet and cold as the grave, spoke from the shadows of the seat above her. I usually prefer my assassins to knock before entering. Genevieve froze. The warmth of the carriage instantly turned to ice in her veins. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, she lifted her head. The interior of the carriage was dim, lit only by the flickering passing street lamps outside, casting rhythmic slashes of yellow light across the cabin. Sitting on the velvet bench seat, legs crossed casually, was a man. He was massive, that was her first impression. Even sitting, his shoulders seemed to fill the width of the carriage. He wore a heavy greatcoat of dark wool, the collar turned up, framing a face that was strikingly, devastatingly severe. High cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from granite, and eyes that were lost in shadow. In his gloved hand, resting steadily on his knee, was a double-barreled pistol. The muzzle was pointed directly at her heart. I am not an assassin, Genevieve stammered, her voice trembling. A thief, then? The man's voice was devoid of emotion. It was a voice used to giving orders that were instantly obeyed. Though I admit, stealing a carriage while it is in motion is a new technique, commendable athleticism. I am not a thief. She tried to sit up, but her heavy, wet dress tangled around her. She looked ridiculous. She knew a drowned rat in a wedding gown. The man leaned forward slightly into a shaft of light. His eyes were a startling, piercing grey, like a winter sea. He looked at the letter opener she was still clutching, white-knuckled in her hand. "You enter my carriage uninvited, breathless and brandishing a weapon," he drawled, gesturing to the tiny silver blade. "Forgive me if I don't immediately offer you tea." Genevieve dropped the letter opener as if it were red hot. "It was for protection. Please, sir. I mean you no harm. I only needed to hide." "Hide?" He raised a dark eyebrow. "From whom?" "From men. Bad men. London is full of bad men, little bird. Usually they are the ones riding inside carriages like this, not fleeing them." He didn't lower the gun. He studied her, his gaze dissecting her. He took in the mud-stained hem of the expensive silk, the diamond pins in her dishevelled hair, the quality of the velvet cloak. "You are not a street urchin." He observed his tone, shifting from threat to curiosity. "That is French lace. And those pearls are real. You are running from a scandal." "I am running for my life," Genevieve corrected, finding a spark of anger to replace the fear. "And if you have a shred of gentlemanly honor, you will let me stay until we are past the city limits." The man laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. "Honor, you have chosen the wrong carriage for honor, my dear. Do you know who I am?" Genevieve shook her head. "I don't care who you are as long as you are not Baron Vane." The man's expression changed. The amusement vanished, replaced by a shark-like intensity. "Vane Silas Vane." "Yes. And why is the reputable Baron chasing a girl through the mud in the middle of the night?" "Because," Genevieve whispered, looking down at her hands, "I was supposed to marry him tomorrow." The carriage hit a rut, jostling them. The man finally lowered the pistol, uncocking it with a practiced thumb. He sat back, the shadows reclaiming his face. "Silas Vane," he mused almost to himself, "a man with an appetite for cruelty and a wallet full of blood money. You know him. I know of him. He is a parasite." The stranger looked at her again. "You are the sterling girl, then, the Viscount's daughter," Genevieve gasped. "How do you know that—" "It is my business to know where the money in this city flows, and I know your father owes a great deal of it to very dangerous people." He reached up and banged his cane on the roof of the carriage. Genevieve flinched, thinking he was signaling the driver to stop and throw her out. "Drive on," he shouted to the coachman. "Do not stop, for the toll make for the North Road." The carriage surged forward, the horses accelerating into a gallop. Genevieve was thrown back against the squabs. She looked at him bewildered. You are helping me." "I am leaving London," he said flatly. "You happen to be going the same direction. Do not mistake convenience for chivalry." He reached into a compartment and pulled out a heavy wool blanket, tossing it at her. It landed with a heavy thud. "Cover yourself. You are dripping on my upholstery." Genevieve wrapped the blanket around her shivering shoulders. "Thank you. I am Genevieve. Lady Genevieve." "I know who you are," he repeated. He turned his face toward the window, watching the city blur by. "And you?" she asked, her curiosity overriding her caution. "Who are you?" He turned back to her. The lightning outside flashed, illuminating his face, hard-scarred, slightly near the temple, and devastatingly handsome in a brutal, imperious way. "I am Sebastian Thorne." Genevieve stopped breathing. Sebastian Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood. The stories about him were whispered in drawing rooms behind fans. They called him the Iron Duke, or the Merchant of Death. He controlled the shipping lines, the coal mines, and half the political favors in Parliament. He was rumored to have killed a man in a duel in Italy, and to have built his fortune on the ruins of his enemies. He was the most powerful, ruthless man in England. And she was sitting on his floor. The Duke of Blackwood," she squeaked. "The very same." A smirk ghosted his lips. "You said you feared Baron Vane, Lady Genevieve. You should check your priorities. You have just locked yourself in a box with a monster far worse than a country baron." He closed his eyes, leaning his head back. "Now be silent. It is a 3-day journey to my estate in Cumbria. If you speak too much, I will leave you on the roadside in York." Genevieve sat in the corner, clutching the blanket, her eyes wide. The carriage thundered into the darkness, carrying a runaway bride, and the devil himself bound for the wild, snowy north. She had escaped the fire only to jump straight into the heart of the volcano. The carriage rolled north, a sealed capsule of tension, moving through a world rapidly turning white. For the first 4 hours, silence had reigned, heavy, thick, and suffocating. The Duke of Blackwood, Sebastian Thorne, had ignored Genevieve, completely burying his attention in a stack of correspondence he had pulled from a leather satchel. He read by the light of a small oil lamp fixed to the carriage wall, his face a mask of indifference. Genevieve, shivering despite the heavy wool blanket, watched him covertly. He was a terrifying creature. Up close, the rumors of his brutality seemed entirely plausible. There was a stillness to him that was predatory. He didn't fidget. He didn't shift his weight. He simply existed, occupying the space with the gravity of a collapsed star. Outside, the weather was turning from a drizzle into a deluge, and then, as the temperature plummeted, into a ferocious sleet. The carriage wheels began to slip on the mud-packed road. "We are slowing down," Genevieve whispered, breaking the silence. Sebastian didn't look up from his letter. "The roads are freezing. If the axle snaps, we walk. I suggest you pray for the axle." "You are incredibly unpleasant." She snapped, fatigue fraying her fear. "For a duke." He finally looked at her, his grey eyes glinting. "And you are incredibly chatty. For a stowaway." The carriage lurched violently, sliding sideways before coming to a grinding halt. The horses whinnied in panic. Sebastian cursed a sharp, guttural word and kicked the door open before the vehicle had even fully settled. He stepped out into the swirling snow. Genevieve wrapped the blanket tighter, peering out. They were in the middle of a dense forest, the trees skeletal and coated in ice. Sebastian returned a moment later, shaking snow from his greatcoat. "The pass is blocked. A drift has buried the road ahead. We cannot reach the next posting house." "What do we do?" Genevieve asked, her teeth chattering. "We walk. There is a coaching inn 2 miles back. The Hanging Gate." He grimaced as he said the name. "It is a rat hole, but it has a roof." He extended a hand. It was large, gloved in black leather. Genevieve hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, surprisingly warm and unyielding. He pulled her down from the carriage as if she weighed nothing. "My driver will take the horses to the stables once we clear the path tomorrow," Sebastian barked. "Stay close to me. If you wander off in this storm, I won't come looking for you." The walk was a nightmare. The wind cut through Genevieve's damp wedding dress like a knife. She stumbled constantly in the deepening snow, her satin slippers useless against the frozen ground. Twice she fell, and twice Sebastian hauled her up without a word, his arm acting as a brace against the wind. By the time they saw the warm yellow glow of the inn's windows, she was numb to the bone. The Hanging Gate lived up to its name. It was a sprawling, crooked timber building that looked as though it had been leaning into the wind for 2 centuries. A rusted iron sign creaked ominously above the door. Sebastian kicked the door open. The common room fell silent. It was packed with travellers, stranded by the storm merchant's drovers, and a few rough-looking soldiers. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, roasting onions, and cheap ale. As Sebastian stepped into the light, his height and the richness of his coat drew every eye. He radiated wealth, which in a place like this usually meant victim. A burly man with a scar running through his eyebrow stood up from a table near the fire, blocking their path. "Fancy coat for these parts," the man sneered, eyeing Genevieve. "And a pretty bird, too. A bit wet, though." Genevieve shrank behind Sebastian. Sebastian didn't raise his voice. He didn't even posture. He simply unbuttoned his greatcoat, revealing the fine tailoring of his suit, and more importantly, the silver-handled pistol tucked into his waistband. He looked at the scarred man. "Move, or bleed." The threat was delivered with such casual boredom that the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The scarred man blinked, looked at the pistol, then at Sebastian's cold, dead eyes. The predator instinct recognized a bigger predator. The man sat down. The landlord, a sweating, balding man in a stained apron, rushed forward, wringing his hands. "My lord, we didn't expect. "We are full, sir. The storm, you see. I require a room," Sebastian said, tossing a gold sovereign onto the counter. It spun and settled with a heavy ring, and a private fire, and food that hasn't been eaten by rats first. A room, yes. We have the best room, but only one, my lord. The rest are packed 4 to a bed. Genevieve froze. 1 room. Sebastian glanced at her, then back to the landlord. "It will suffice. My wife is exhausted." The lie hung in the air. Genevieve looked up at him, shocked, but he ignored her, steering her toward the stairs with a hand on the small of her back. The touch burned through the wet silk. The room was small, draughty, and dominated by a large 4-poster bed with sagging curtains. A fire crackled weakly in the grate. As soon as the door latched, Genevieve spun away from him. "Your wife. Would you prefer mistress?" Sebastian began, peeling off his wet gloves. "Or perhaps hostage? In an establishment like this, a lone woman with a rich man is prey. A wife is property. Men respect property even if they don't respect women." He walked to the fire and poked it into a blaze. "Get out of that wet dress. You're turning blue." Genevieve wrapped her arms around herself. I have nothing else to wear." Sebastian sighed, looking at the ceiling as if asking God for patience. He opened his satchel and pulled out a clean white linen shirt. "Wear this. It will cover you sufficiently." He turned his back, walking to the frosted window. "I will not look. I have seen women before, Genevieve. You are not a unicorn." Genevieve struggled out of the sodden wedding gown. The heavy silk, mud-stained and ruined, fell to the floor in a heap, a symbol of the life she had just shed. She pulled on Sebastian's shirt. It was enormous on her, coming down to her knees, the sleeves swallowing her hands. It smelled of him, cedar rain and spice. "I am decent," she whispered. Sebastian turned. His gaze flicked over her, lingering for a fraction of a second on her bare legs before snapping back to her face. His expression tightened. "Sit by the fire," he ordered. They ate in silence. The landlord brought up a stew that was surprisingly passable, and a bottle of dark wine. Sebastian drank deeply, the firelight casting hollows in his face. "Why him?" Sebastian asked, suddenly breaking the quiet. "Vain. Why did your father choose him?" Genevieve stared into the flames. "Debt. My father gambles on everything. Horses, cards, the weather. He owes Vane £40,000. Vane offered to forgive the debt in exchange for a title connection. He wants to be a viscount one day. Marrying me puts him in line." 40,000, Sebastian scoffed. "A cheap price for a soul." "It is not cheap to me." She looked at him, her eyes fierce. "Vane hurts things. I have seen his horses. I have seen his servants. He enjoys fear. I decided I would rather freeze in a ditch than let him touch me." Sebastian fell silent. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. He saw not just a spoiled noblewoman, but something steelier. "Show me," he said softly. "Show you what? Your arm. You were wincing when you took off the cloak." Genevieve hesitated, then rolled up the oversized sleeve of the linen shirt. On her upper arm, dark purple bruises bloomed against the pale skin finger marks. Sebastian's face went terrifyingly blank. He reached out his fingers, hovering inches from the skin but not touching it. "Your father. He wanted to make sure I walked down the aisle." Sebastian stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loud against the floorboards. He walked to the window, staring out at the blizzard. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Sleep," he commanded, his voice rough. "Take the bed." "Where will you sleep?" "The chair." "Sebastian, you cannot. Do not argue with me, Genevieve. I am not a gentleman. I am a tired man with a loaded pistol and a short temper. Take the bed. Genevieve climbed into the cold sheets. She watched him settle into the wooden armchair, stretching his long legs out, wrapping himself in his dry greatcoat. Sebastian, she whispered into the darkness. Go to sleep, little bird. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind howling outside, and the steady rhythmic breathing of the monster keeping watch in the chair. For the first time in months, she felt entirely safe. The dawn brought a blinding, brilliant silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of pristine white powder. Genevieve woke to the smell of coffee. Sebastian was already up, fully dressed, shaving in front of a small, cracked mirror, using a bowl of hot water. The intimacy of the act, watching the blade scrape across his jaw, made her cheeks heat up. He caught her eye in the reflection. Up! The driver has dug out the carriage. We leave in 10 minutes. The spell of the night before the quiet understanding by the fire was gone. He was back to being the Iron Duke, efficient, cold, and distant. Genevieve dressed quickly, putting her ruined wedding dress back on with a grimace. It was dry now, but stiff with dried mud. She felt like a walking disaster. They left the hanging gate without breakfast. The carriage horses rested and fed huffed clouds of steam into the frigid air. The journey resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every time Sebastian looked at her, his gaze lingered on the bruises hidden beneath her sleeve. We will reach the crossroads in an hour, Sebastian said, checking his pocket watch. From there the road to York is clear. I will leave you at the convent of St. Jude. The Mother Superior owes me a favor. You will be safe there until you can contact your relatives. Genevieve felt a hollow pit open in her stomach. You are leaving me. I told you. I am not a knight in shining armor. I am a businessman. I have business in Cumbria. You are a complication. But Vane will find me at a convent. He has men everywhere. The church is sanctuary. Even Vane is not stupid enough to storm a nunnery. He is not stupid, Sebastian. He is obsessed. You don't know him. And you don't know me. He cut her off sharply. I work alone. I live alone. I do not drag stray kittens into my wars. The carriage slowed as they approached a narrow stone bridge crossing a frozen river. The woods pressed in close here, dark pines looming over the road. Suddenly, the carriage lurched to a violent stop. The horses screamed. Sebastian was moving before the wheels stopped turning. He shoved Genevieve to the floorboards. Stay down. What is it? Tree across the road. A classic ambush. He checked the priming on his pistol and pulled a second one from a hidden compartment under the seat. He didn't look afraid. He looked bored. Outside, a rough voice shouted, Stand and deliver or we gut the horses. Highwayman! Genevieve whispered, trembling. No, Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Highwaymen are not organized enough to fell a tree this size. This is a hunting party. He kicked the door open and stepped out, leveling the pistol. Genevieve peeked over the window ledge. Blocking the road were 5 men on horseback. They were heavily armed, wearing thick wool coats. In the center sat a man Genevieve recognized instantly. It wasn't Vane wouldn't dirty his own hands, but it was his head groom, a brute named Keller. Duke of Blackwood! Keller shouted, his breath misting. We have no quarrel with you, your grace. You have something of ours. Hand over the girl and you can pass. Sebastian stood in the snow, a solitary figure in black against the white world. He looked up at the mounted men with an expression of mild distaste. You're blocking the king's road, Sebastian said calmly. Move. Did you hear me, Duke? The girl. She belongs to Baron Vane. I see no girl. Sebastian lied, his voice steady as a rock. I see only a blocked road and 5 dead men talking. Keller sneered and drew a long cavalry saber. "Get him, but don't shoot the carriage. The Baron wants the girl intact." The violence erupted with terrifying speed. Keller charged his horse, kicking up snow. Sebastian didn't flinch. He waited until the horse was almost on top of him, then fired. The shot didn't hit the rider. It hit the horse in the chest. The beast collapsed, throwing Keller into the snow. In the same motion, Sebastian dropped the spent pistol, drew the second, and fired at the man on the left. The man spun out of his saddle, a red blossom appearing on his chest. The remaining 3 men hesitated. They hadn't expected a duke to fight like a gutter brawler. "Get him, you idiots!" Keller screamed, scrambling to his feet, mud and snow covering his face. 2 men charged. Sebastian tossed the empty pistol at the face of the first rider, causing him to flinch, and used the distraction to grab the man's leg, ripping him from the saddle with inhuman strength. He threw the man to the ground and delivered a sickening kick to the temple. The man stopped moving. The last rider swung a club. Sebastian ducked the wood, whistling over his head, and drew a hidden blade from his cane, a long, shimmering rapier of Toledo steel. He lunged. The blade pierced the rider's shoulder. The man howled and wheeled his horse around, fleeing into the woods. Keller was back on his feet now, charging Sebastian with his saber. Genevieve screamed. "Sebastian! Behind you!" Sebastian turned. Keller swung the saber in a killing arc. Sebastian parried with his cane sword, sparks flying as steel met steel. They circled each other in the snow. Keller was strong, but clumsy with rage. Sebastian was fluid, precise, a dancer of death. "You think you can protect her?" Keller grunted, swinging wildly. "Vane will burn your house down. He has the promissory notes. He owns your debts, too. Blackwood." Sebastian froze for a fraction of a second. "What did you say?" "He bought your markers." Keller laughed breathlessly. "From the Italian banks, you're as much his property as the bitch is." Sebastian's eyes went black. He parried a thrust, stepped inside Keller's guard, and drove his fist into the man's throat. Keller gagged and dropped the sword. Sebastian swept his legs, sending the heavy man crashing onto the ice. Sebastian placed the tip of his sword against Keller's throat. "Tell Vane," Sebastian hissed, his voice low and terrible, "that he has made a grave error in calculation. He thinks he bought a debtor. Tell him he has woken a war." He withdrew the blade. "Run, before I change my mind." Keller scrambled backward, eyes wide with terror, then turned and ran into the forest, stumbling through the drifts. Silence returned to the road, broken only by the heavy breathing of the horses. The snow was stained with crimson. Sebastian stood there for a long moment, staring at the blood on his blade. Then he wiped it clean on his coat-tails and sheathed it. He walked back to the carriage. He opened the door. Genevieve was huddled in the corner, staring at him with wide, shocked eyes. She had just watched him kill a man and maim 2 others in under 2 minutes. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was devoid of adrenaline. It was just business. "No," she whispered. "Good." He climbed back in and signaled the driver. "Drive on." "Where are we going?" Genevieve asked, her voice trembling. "To the convent." Sebastian looked at her. The distance in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. "No, the convent is not safe. If Vane holds my debts, he thinks he can squeeze me. He thinks he can take what is mine." He leaned forward, his face close to hers. The danger radiating off him was palpable but thrilling. "We are going to Blackwood Manor. You are no longer a stowaway, Genevieve. You are now a declaration of war." Genevieve looked at the man who had just slaughtered for her. She should have been terrified. She should have run. But as the carriage lurched forward, carrying them toward his mountain fortress, she realized with a jolt that she didn't want to leave. She had asked for a savior. Fate had sent her a warlord. Blackwood Manor did not emerge from the landscape. It seemed to have been carved violently out of the living rock of the Cumbrian mountains. It was a fortress of dark grey stone, perched on a cliff edge, overlooking a churning frozen sea. As the carriage passed through the iron gates, Genevieve saw not a ruin but a kingdom. Torches blazed along the battlements. Dozens of servants were already rushing out into the snow, not in fear, but with genuine relief. They weren't greeting a master, they feared. They were welcoming a protector. "Get the physician," Sebastian barked as he jumped from the carriage, ignoring the grooms reaching for his coat. "And prepare the east wing. We have a guest." Inside the great hall was a cavern of tapestries and roaring fireplaces large enough to roast an ox. The warmth hit Genevieve like a physical wave, stripping away the chill of the ambush. "Take her," Sebastian ordered a stern-faced housekeeper. "Hot bath, dry clothes, food. I have matters to attend to." He didn't look back. He marched toward his study, his boots echoing on the flagstones, leaving a trail of melting snow and blood. 2 hours later, Genevieve felt human again. She was dressed in a gown of deep blue velvet, found in an old trunk in the attic, smelling faintly of lavender, and her hair was pinned up. She wandered down the grand staircase, drawn by the sound of voices. She found Sebastian in the library. It was a room of shadows and leather, the walls lined with thousands of books. He was sitting by the fire, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. The physician had just finished stitching a cut on his arm, a wound she hadn't even realized he'd taken during the fight. "You're bleeding," she said, stepping into the room. Sebastian waved the physician away. "It is a scratch. I have had worse shaving." The door clicked shut, leaving them alone. The silence stretched heavy and electric. "Why?" Genevieve asked, walking closer. "Why did you bring me here? You said Vane owns your debts. Bringing me here only paints a target on your back." Sebastian looked into the fire. The flames reflected in his grey eyes, making them look like molten silver. "Because, Genevieve, there are things more valuable than gold." He stood up and walked to a desk, unlocking a drawer. He pulled out a stack of papers, crumpled, stained, and ominous. He tossed them onto the table. "Vane didn't just buy my debts," Sebastian said, his voice low. "He manufactured them." Genevieve picked up the papers. They were shipping manifests. "I don't understand. 3 years ago, I invested everything in a fleet of ships to bring grain from the Americas. There was a famine in the north. My tenants were starving. I risked the entire Blackwood fortune to feed them." He poured another drink, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from suppressed rage. "The ships never arrived. They were scuttled off the coast of Ireland. Sabotaged. I lost everything. The insurance company refused to pay, claiming negligence. That company was secretly owned by Silas Vane. He sank my ships to bankrupt me, then bought the debt from the banks for pennies on the pound. He has been waiting for the interest to compound so he can take this house." Genevieve dropped the papers. "He is a monster. He is a businessman," Sebastian corrected bitterly. "And I was a fool who played with his heart instead of his head." He turned to her. The distance between them seemed to vanish. He looked tired, vulnerable, in a way the world never saw. "I cannot pay him," Sebastian admitted. "If he calls the debt tomorrow, I lose Blackwood. I lose the land. My people lose their homes. And now I have stolen his bride." "You didn't steal me," Genevieve said fiercely. She took a step toward him. "I ran, and you caught me." "I should send you away," he rasped, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I have nothing to offer you but a crumbling fortress and a ruined name." "I don't want a name," she whispered. "I have a name. It brought me nothing but misery." She reached out her hand, trembling, and touched the bandage on his arm. You fought for me. No one has ever fought for me. My father sold me. Vane bought me. You bled for me. Sebastian's control snapped. He reached out his hand, cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing her lower lip. His touch was rough, calloused, and overwhelmingly gentle. Genevieve, he groaned, you are the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to me. He kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, polite kiss. It was a collision. It was the storm outside crashing into the fire inside. He pulled her against him, his arm locking around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. Genevieve buried her hands in his hair, pulling him closer, desperate to erase the memory of Vane, of her father, of the cold. For a moment, the world of debts and barons didn't exist. There was only the scent of cedar, the taste of brandy, and the strength of the Iron Duke. Boom! A heavy thud echoed through the manor. Then another. The great iron knocker on the front door was being slammed with the force of a battering ram. They broke apart, breathless. He is here, Sebastian said. The vulnerability vanished instantly, replaced by the cold mask of the warlord. Vane! Genevieve gasped. No! Sebastian walked to the window and looked down into the courtyard. Lawyers and soldiers. He has brought the magistrate. He turned back to her, his eyes hard. Stay in this room. Do not come out until I tell you. Sebastian, what are you going to do? He walked to the wall and pulled down a pair of antique dueling pistols from above the mantel. He checked the flints. I'm going to negotiate, he said darkly. Blackwood style. The courtyard of Blackwood Manor was illuminated by sputtering torches held by a dozen of the king's dragoons. The snow was knee-deep, trampled into a muddy slush by the hooves of nervous horses. At the center of the chaos stood Baron Silas Vane. He was a man who looked like a reptile dressed in velvet. He wore a coat of purple silk that was far too fine for the weather, and his face was powdered white, hiding the pox scars that marred his cheeks. He held a cane tipped with gold, tapping it impatiently against his boot. Open this gate, Blackwood! Vane shrieked, his voice, high and reedy. I have a warrant. I have the magistrate. You are harboring a fugitive and a thief. The heavy oak doors of the manor groaned open. Sebastian Thorne stepped out alone. He wore no coat, only a white shirt and black breeches. The wind whipped his dark hair around his face. He looked like a fallen angel standing against the void. You are trespassing, Sebastian said, his voice projecting effortlessly over the wind. I am collecting, Vane sneered. He gestured to a nervous-looking man in a wig standing beside him. Magistrate timidly stepped forward. Your Grace, Lord Vane has presented papers. The debt is due. Immediately. Default grants him seizure of the property and all assets within. And the girl, Vane added, licking his lips, she is an asset. She is wearing my jewelry. Genevieve was watching from the library window, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't stay up there. She couldn't watch him lose everything. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, a pathetic weapon, but a weapon nonetheless, and ran for the stairs. By the time she burst through the front doors, the tension in the courtyard had reached a breaking point. I do not have the money, Sebastian was saying calmly. Then I take the house, Vane laughed. And I take the girl. Seize him. Wait! The scream tore through the air. Genevieve ran out into the snow, stumbling in her slippers, placing herself between Sebastian and the soldiers. Genevieve, get back, Sebastian roared. No, she turned to face Vane. You want me? I am here. Leave him alone. Take your blood money out of my dowry. Vane chuckled a wet, ugly sound. Your dowry is already mine, my dear. Your father signed it over this morning. I own you. I own him. I own the ground you are standing on." He looked at Sebastian with pure, unadulterated malice. "Look at the mighty Iron Duke, reduced to a pauper. I think I shall make you my stable boy, Blackwood. It would be fitting." Sebastian gently moved Genevieve aside. His face was eerily calm. "You are right, Vane. You have the law. You have the paper." Sebastian took a step forward. "But you do not have the land yet. Not until I sign the deed of surrender." "Then sign it." "I propose a wager," Sebastian said. Vane raised an eyebrow. "You have nothing to bet." "I have my life," Sebastian said. "And I have the honor of the peerage." He looked at the magistrate. "Under the ancient laws of Cumbria, a dispute of land and honor may be settled by a trial of arms if both parties are peers." The magistrate sputtered. "Your Grace, that law hasn't been invoked since the 1600s. It is barbaric." "It is law," Sebastian insisted. "I challenge you, Silas Vane. A duel. To the death." Vane laughed nervously. "I don't fight duels with bankrupts. If you win—" Sebastian continued, his voice steady. "You get the estate, the title, and my life. No legal battles, no delays, immediate possession." "And if I win," Sebastian pointed a finger at Vane, "the debt is forgiven. The slate is wiped clean. And you leave England forever." Vane hesitated. He looked at Sebastian, who was standing in the freezing cold without shivering. Then he looked at the soldiers. He looked at Genevieve. Vane was arrogant, but he was also a coward. However, he knew Sebastian was injured. He had seen the bloody bandage on Sebastian's arm. He also knew that he, Vane, was considered the finest shot in London's pistol clubs. "Pistols," Vane said, his eyes narrowing. "At 10 paces, immediately." "Agreed," Sebastian said. The courtyard was cleared. The soldiers formed a perimeter. The wind seemed to die down, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Genevieve grabbed Sebastian's arm. "No," she sobbed. "He is a marksman. You are hurt. Your arm." Sebastian looked down at her. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "My right arm is hurt, Genevieve." He picked up the pistol with his left hand. "I never told you," he whispered, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I am left-handed." Genevieve froze. Sebastian walked to the center of the courtyard. He stood back to back with Baron Vane. The magistrate's voice quavered. "Gentlemen, prepare to turn." Sebastian closed his eyes. He didn't think about the cold. He didn't think about the debt. He thought about the smell of lavender on Genevieve's skin. He thought about the fire in the library. He thought about the future he had denied himself for so long. 1, 2, 3. They walked. The snow crunched under their boots. 7, 8, 9. Vane was eager. Too eager. At the count of 9, Vane turned early. It was a dishonorable move, a cheat's move. He spun around, raising his pistol before the final count. 10. Vane fired. The shot cracked through the air. The bullet whizzed past Sebastian's ear, nicking the collar of his shirt. Vane had rushed the shot. He had missed. Sebastian stopped. He turned slowly. He raised his pistol with his left hand. The barrel did not waver. It was as steady as the stone walls of Blackwood Manor. Vane stood there, his smoking pistol in hand, his eyes wide with the realization of his own death. He dropped to his knees in the snow. "No, please, I have money, I have—" Sebastian looked at the man who had starved his tenants, the man who had terrorized Genevieve. "You have nothing," Sebastian said softly. He pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening. Vane was thrown backward into the snow, a single clean hole in the center of his chest. The Baron stared up at the winter sky, seeing nothing. Silence descended on the courtyard. The magistrate rushed forward to check the body. He looked up, pale and shaken. "He is dead." Sebastian lowered the smoking gun. He didn't look at the body. He turned to Genevieve. She ran to him, colliding with him in the snow, her arms wrapping around his neck. He caught her burying his face in her hair, his knees finally shaking as the adrenaline left him. "It is over," he whispered into the cold air. "It is finally over." But as the soldiers began to disperse, dragging the body away, Sebastian looked up at the moon. He knew the truth. The debt was gone, but the scandal was just beginning. He had killed a baron in cold blood in front of a magistrate. The law had been satisfied, but society would not be so forgiving. He looked at Genevieve. He had won the war, but he still had to win the peace. Spring arrived in Cumbria not with a whisper, but with a riot of wildflowers that broke through the thawing earth, painting the grey cliffs in strokes of violet and gold. The ice that had encased Blackwood Manor melted away, revealing a home that was no longer a fortress against the world, but a sanctuary. In London, the newspapers were still printing scandal sheets. They called it the affair of the century. They whispered about the runaway bride who had bewitched the Iron Duke and the duel that had left a baron dead in the snow. Society matrons clutched their pearls, and debutantes swooned over the romantic violence of it all. But hundreds of miles away, the Duke and his new Duchess paid them no mind. Genevieve stood on the stone balcony overlooking the sea, the salt breeze tangling her hair. She was no longer wearing the oversized shirt of a stranger or the ruined silk of a victim. She wore a gown of deep emerald, the color of the Blackwood crest, and on her finger rested a ring of ancient, heavy gold. They had married 3 weeks after the duel in the small, draughty chapel on the estate. There were no hundreds of guests, no suffocating perfumes, no debts to be paid with her flesh. There was only the priest, the housekeeper, and the man who held her hand as if it were the only anchor in a stormy sea. Steps clicked on the stone behind her. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against a solid chest. "You are staring at the horizon again," Sebastian murmured, pressing a kiss to the curve of her neck. "Are you looking for a ship to escape on?" Genevieve laughed, leaning into him. "I have done enough escaping for one lifetime, Your Grace. Besides, I hear the carriage service in these parts is terribly unreliable." Sebastian chuckled a sound that came easily to him now. The shadows that had haunted his eyes for years had retreated, chased away by the woman who had tumbled through his window. "I received a letter from your father today," Sebastian said, his voice hardening slightly. "He asks for an allowance. He claims poverty." "Burn it," Genevieve said without hesitation. "He made his choice. I have made mine." Sebastian turned her around so he could look into her face. The severe lines of his own face softened. "You saved me, you know. I was a ghost in this house until you broke in. And you saved me," she whispered, touching the faint scar on his temple. "I was a bird in a cage. You gave me the sky." They stood there as the sun set over the Irish Sea. 2 survivors who had found love in the wreckage of a winter storm. Genevieve Sterling had run from a marriage of death, only to run straight into a love that would become a legend. She had hidden in the Duke's carriage to save her life. She had stayed to save his soul, and so the scandal that shook the British Empire became its greatest love story. Genevieve and Sebastian proved that sometimes the wrong turn leads to the right destination, and that even the coldest hearts can be thawed by the fire of a defiant spirit. They lived out their days at Blackwood Manor, not as the monster society feared, but as the protectors of their own private world, proof that true power isn't about controlling others, but about finding the one person worth fighting the world for. What a ride, from a desperate escape in a wedding dress to a duel at dawn in the snow. Genevieve and Sebastian's story reminds us that fortune favors the brave. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more epic historical romances, scandals, and dramatic twists, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell notification so you never miss a story. What would you have done in Genevieve's shoes? Would you have jumped into the carriage? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.